everyone, welcome to the APPIC video series. Today I have three guests who are all doctoral candidates in school psychology programs, and they've all just finished the APPIC process and are transitioning into their internships. So I want to have them introduce themselves to you now.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Campbell, and I'm a fifth year, transitioning to my sixth year, doctoral candidate at UW-Madison. And my internship will be at the East Family Guidance Center in Hilo, Hawaii. It's a community mental health center.
Hi, this is Dew. I'm also similar to all my colleagues here. I am transitioning to my sixth year and starting internship very soon with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We'll be at the autism track. Yes, and I also from the University of Houston in the school psych program.
Yes, so all of us are in sort of the same timeline. My name is Adriana Crossing, and I am a rising sixth year doctoral candidate in the PhD school psych program there. And I will soon be starting my internship at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School in the child clinical track.
All right, welcome back to the third video in the APPIC series. Today we're going to be talking about the application timeline and process. So let's go ahead and start with kind of like a brief overview of what the timeline of the application process might look like.
So for figuring out your timeline, everyone's going to have, a little bit different of how they work. I personally am a person who I need some deadlines to put some pressure on me to function best. So there are some folks who have provided really great resources online to give some ideas on how you might start your timeline. So we're going to link to Dr. Grace Chen's website down below, and Dr. Grace Chen has like a nice starting point. And so what I did was kind of going off what Dr. Chen recommended and also what my timeline looked like. I kind of started out writing out my tasks in a spreadsheet, and I'll share that with you now. We'll also share so you can make your own copy if you're interested in it down below. And this might be overwhelming for some people, and other people will think, oh, now my life feels more clear. And that helped me just like get the thoughts out on paper, basically, because I was feeling very freaked out by the amount of things to do. So by having kind of a list of, started out with a task list of what I knew I needed to do based on our things I could find and information that my program provided us. I then started to kind of sketch out dates on when to do stuff. If I wanted to send it to people who to send it to, some helpful links to the side. And it's not, and this was flexible. Like I changed dates all over the place as I needed to, but this just gave me a starting place of like, okay, how much stuff do I actually have left to do? Breaking each task down into like smaller parts, like outlining your essay before you write it or whatever, that kind of thing. So would recommend making some version of something, because if you're just trying to hold all the tasks in your mind, there's a lot of them and it can feel very overwhelming. But being able to, like, if you're a person who likes checking a list off and getting that done, I found it very helpful. So we'll provide that in case it's helpful for you. If not, no worries. And then Adriana's gonna share some more about like what to look for and when to start looking for those things.
Yeah, so I know when I started the APPIC process, I think January hit, and all I could see looming in the distance on my calendar was that these applications were due on November 1st. And so I'm the type of person where like I have to start thinking about something far in advance. Otherwise, I know that I get kind of anxious leading up to it. And fall of your application year is not a good time you want to be overrun with anxiety, because there's all this other stuff to be anxious about, like dissertation proposal, advanced practicum, really pushing your skills, any other things that might be going on. So what I started doing was just jotting down notes months and months and months before the applications are due. And even if it changed over time, at least I know I was thinking ahead about it. So I was thinking about what types of sites I wanted, what I wanted to do when I was done with internship and postdoc, things that were really hitting me and striking me that were within the field of psychology, things that were developing, so that when it came to start really looking in depth at brochures and handbooks and things like that, I knew what I was looking for, things that were going to jump at me based on these notes that I already had. So those are some of the notes I had. I'm also very much a writing and verbal processor. Steph, I believe, processes specifically in spreadsheets, which I love for her. But for me, I need lots of notes, narratives, sticky notes, because I guess that's how I'm organized up here. So one thing I also did was I looked at what the 4 types of essays were, and I started just writing things about myself, about my professional views, about what I thought my talents were, about my interests in psychology, things about myself like my personal ethics or my history or my minoritized identities that really shaped the way that I practice psychology and conduct psychological research. And then organizing those statements and refining those statements into those 4 categories of the essays. And they're going to change over time. I think my essays went through like 8 versions over the course of 3 months. And that's a good thing, because you want that final version to be something you've really poured your heart and soul into. So yeah, that's something that I would say. And one thing that in my program, a couple of students did is write out what you want to do on internship, what you want to be doing about 2 to 3 years after internship, and what you want to be doing 5 to 10 years. And what you want to do is look for a thread. So for me, I knew that I wanted to do assessment. I wanted to still be doing research. I wanted to serve a high needs population. I wanted to handle like complex cases, so like medical things and genetic conditions, and do assessment for things like that. And I still wanted to be a trainer. And when I looked at those list of things, I was like, well, that's 4 different careers, Adriana. How are you going to merge all that together? And I sent like a little like half-page write-up of what all my goals were spread across that timeline. And my DCT was like, you want to be an assistant professor at an academic medical center and do your work in a hospital. That way you'll have access to both clinical work and a little bit of research. You can divide your time in a way that makes sense, and you'll still get to supervise students who are learning. And I was just like, well, why didn't I think of that? And it's because I'm brand new at this, and our DCTs and faculty and our clinical directors and all that good stuff, they've been at this for a while. So look to those who are way above you and process through the things that you want out of your career, and then you can aim yourself accordingly.
And to help you get started on that, we can share a link to a PDF that has some questions like about your dreams and just some spaces to kind of brainstorm in a guided way. We'll link in doobly-doo, and that is courtesy of the NASP Graduate Student Committee over the past couple of years. People put together this packet to share with folks at a NASP presentation, and so we want to make it available to y'all as well.
So I just want to add to like what Adriana was saying, that thinking about the story, that thread throughout, I think that's so important to start that, because that's sort of become a framework to like help us kind of guide the selection of sites, and we narrow it down to like hundreds and hundreds of sites. And I think for me, based on my personal experience, that I was like, really wanting to work with the population affected by autism and families and interventions. Those are the main things I want to work for. And so like I kind of pull up the APPIC website and type in the word autism in like anywhere in that the page they have, and then I'll add that word in there and see how many sites popped up. And then from that, I download that as an Excel, and then I read through all their, the first page on the APPIC and see how that works. And then I click on their their handbook, and then from that, it's kind of like figure out what they're looking for, how my stories can fit into that as well. Because by the time I'm really applying for this year, everything's sort of set in stone already. Like like all that practical experience, that's already there. But like, how can we, like Steph was saying earlier, how can we set a story that makes sense to us, that reflect who we are, all the greatness that we have, the highlights we have done, but also it's a good fit to those sides, but also a good fit for our goals. So then this is the reason why we might want to start a little bit earlier, so then we can have all those components sort of fit together as we kind of get into like the beginning of fall semester. But yeah, so reading through the site manuals is so important. And then beyond just reading it, like I think a lot of my friends also do that too, is that we actually print it out. Oh god. So many trees have sacrificed in this process. Yes. But it's okay. It's for the greater good. And then we print it out. We really just like highlight it. And believe me, when you highlight those points within the manuals, it's going to be a very helpful things to have when we go into interview, which we'll talk about in a bit later. But then again, highlight those points that you like, okay, I want this. I'm going to talk about my story in a way that also a good match for what they're saying there, bring that together. And also my goals, how my goals be a good fit for what they're offering as well, right? And so then think about those, like the manuals, the handbook, And then within the handbook, there are different links to different like community clinics or other population, extra things. Look for those as well. Look at what their clinics are doing for the population. Do a little research about the places that you really, really want to like be part of. So then, usually we talk about like apply for 12 to 15. Those are like good numbers, a good spot to have. So they really put a lot more investment of energy and time to not only read about the manuals, but read about the clinics, read about the population in surrounding areas, and see how our experience that we have done already for the past 4 to 5 years could be a good fit for this place, and how our goals can be realized, I guess, from this place that they're saying. And then kind of like write that cover letters that way. And then I really want to say in terms of the essays, I think for me, it takes such a long time for the diversity essay. That's just personally for myself. And I think you do now, you're the same way too.
Yes. I spent actually over 30 years writing it, which is older than I am.
I agree. It took like forever, decades to like write that essay. But then because that's the essay that we like really true to our hearts. So then we like took forever and then take the most time to write it. But the point Ricky trying to make is that within these essays, I want to say that just be as authentic as you can, because because for me, and maybe you're the same way too, is that I want to be at a place that value who I am and value the goals that that matter to me, values the things that matter to me, and the experience that I have. And so on all these essays, especially diversity essays, I was very authentic in that, and just be as authentic as you are, because you want to spend this next year, even though it's only 1 year, at the same time, I want to be at the place where I am valued, where everything that I value are also valued by the side, because otherwise, what is the point, right?
Yeah.
So just be as authentic as you can within those essays. Be as honest as you can for those cover letters, what kind of goals that you want to achieve through the internship. Because the same question will be asked again during your interview, and be like, well, what do you want to get out of internship? And so to make sure that when you authenticate your application packet, you will be the same story as you will do an interview with them as well.
Yeah. Can I add something to this? So I think this fits for all of us. So all 4 of the people on this call identify as multicultural or a person of color, or having these experiences of walking through both spaces of whiteness and also spaces that are not white, right? And we're all smiling, I think it's all true. And just like to be blunt, because that's how we make progress in these things, like we have all, most people of color that I'm familiar with have had workplaces where they felt as though they had to hold their tongue or hold back parts of themselves performing aspects of majority culture in order to sail through more smoothly. And I reached a point at some point in my graduate training where I was like, I should not have to do this. I should not have to sacrifice these huge parts of myself. And that was part of what I put in my diversity essay. Across my 4 essays and cover letters, I named white supremacy, I named racial trauma, I named racial stress. I talked about my own experiences with those things. I talked about helping kids and families through those things. And if there's a site that's going to read that and panic, I don't want to be there, because I'm never going to stop talking about those things. Mm-hmm. And so that's more of a like personal political slant on like sort of what Ju was talking about. But like for me, I'm like, where will I maybe experience fewer microaggressions, to be quite frank? And the cool thing about this authentic slant that we're talking about is during my interviews at the places where I ranked the most highly, my interviewers brought up my diversity essay, or they brought up the way that I talked about therapy or research in a way that was very authentic and very personal. And so not only will it feel good to put yourself out there, but the right site is going to love that. The right site is going to be like, this is the type of trainee I want at my institution.
Exactly. We want to be the right place.
Yeah.
That's why.
And
we did it. Yes.
Yeah, y'all killed it. These folks at top tier hospital sites starting next year. Amazing. One other thing to add of just portraying yourself, balancing that, and also figuring out kind of how you sound. I think that's where it goes back to having people in your corner, right? So I had mentioned earlier that my advisors know me fairly well. They're very different identities from me. And so sometimes when they give feedback, it's like, oh yeah, I didn't realized the way I said that would like come off a different way to someone with a very different identity. Another really useful thing, other than my friends reading it who know me well, to like also encourage us to brag on the right things, was I have a friend who's finished his APPIC internship a few years ago and is in clinical psych. And so knowing that I was applying mostly to sites where it was predominantly clinical, I asked him as also a white man to read my stuff and give any feedback he thought. And that perspective was totally different of just like, oh, like this is kind of an assumption that would be made from that kind of point of view. And even if I didn't necessarily change my writing, it was nice to like go into those conversations knowing like a little bit about how I might be perceived based on someone with those types of identities and in that kind of field. And so I really found it valuable to just reach out and get feedback, especially on the essays from people from like various walks of life, right? Like having my partner read it, who actually gave me like, you know, he's not in the field at all, and asking him to just like see how I came off because he knows me really well. And getting, if you're comfortable asking for feedback, and I think it's a great skill to learn if you're not, but if you're comfortable asking multiple people to look it over time, I think that can really help you feel more confident and feel like you're able to represent yourself the best you can.
Cover letters. It feels a little overwhelming at first because if you're applying to 15 sites like I did, 15 sites like you did, or 10 sites like Stephanie did, that's a different cover letter for everyone. Or is it? You don't have to write a brand new 2-page single-space document for every single place. So I'm going to tell you what I did, and I'm going to have my colleagues here chime in because all our processes were a little different, but we all got lots of interviews and felt really confident about our cover letters. So number one, like you mentioned earlier, you want to print out or save the brochures for all of your sites and note the things that stand out most to you or that align really well with your experiences. So for me, I highlighted anywhere that said multicultural, social justice, diversity, minority population, and I also highlighted research opportunities, research experiences. If there was a population they serve that I specifically had experience in, I would circle that too. So for me, that's selective mutism, severe anxiety, minority stress, trauma, and adoption issues. That's just my specific set. Yours is possibly or probably different than that. So you have that sort of in your pocket for customizing the letters. But where I started was I went with my dream site, which is CHOP, which is, we're actually in Philly recording right now. We can see it from this window, no lie. And it had just been a site that I really admired and looked up to since my second year, like I mentioned in one of our previous videos. And so my advisor actually was like, take the one you're most passionate about and use that to give you the momentum to write all those words. And so that's what I did. I sat down and I was like, dear CHOP, please hire me. And I don't know, I was just really inspired by how much I appreciated the site, and I knew the most about that site. That's why they were my top at the time. And so I was able to really outline the whole thing. I organized my cover letters by like introduction. Hey, this is me, here's what I'm applying to. And then I had a paragraph for intervention, a paragraph for assessment, a paragraph for consultation. Sites that had research, I had a very small paragraph for research, and then I had a conclusion paragraph. You don't have to organize yours that way. Everyone might have a different approach, but that's at least how I started to help get my thoughts together. And so with that letter, I then customized that very first letter for CHOP, and then I did my other letter and my other letter and my other. And then by the time I got to maybe 5 or 6 letters, I kind of had like the perfect one, and I kept writing them, but the last thing I did was go back and rewrite my first 3 or 4 letters, which funnily enough, the first 3 or 4 happened to be places that I got interviews at. And so there was something about refining that process. And you'll catch little spelling mistakes and things like that, but doing it that way, really, it gave me, I was organized, I had a process, and for each customization, I just pulled out my brochure and noted the different areas and figured, okay, this one fits into consultation, this one fits into intervention, this one fits into assessment, and that's just how I did it. Some people say be careful about mentioning the site too many times in the letter so you don't accidentally miss one and send a letter that has a different site's name in it. So I do know some folks that only mention the site twice, once in the intro paragraph and once in the conclusion. And listen, my executive function skills are not tippy top, so if you're like me, maybe that's a good move. Anything y'all want to add about the cover letter process? I know I only talked about a couple of things, but
I'm very paranoid about what you just said about not forgetting to change out the name.
Yeah.
So in my templates, I like highlighted it, made the font a different color. I was like, we're not having this accident right now. So definitely recommend that. And I'll say that, we have different approaches to how we did it, and we both did really well. So in my cover letter, I had kind of an intro, basic stuff, what sites I'm talking about, because a lot of mine were either they have multiple tracks or they're a consortium with multiple sites. So like listing in the cover letter which ones you're applying to. They often have like many sites ask for specific information in the cover letter. So make sure you have that all lined up since you're going to be looking at a lot of materials. I then kind of talk about my background and why I'm interested in working with this population, basically. Like, why do I want to work with kids? Why do I want to work with Black and brown children who have experienced trauma? Like, why that's important to me. I have like 1 or 2 big paragraphs, like super bird's eye viewing my training and like the stuff I've done very quickly, with the range of things, because remember, like all this information is also elsewhere, and this is just one piece of the puzzle. So don't feel too stressed about like having like every single thing you've ever done in the cover letter. This is really an overview and an intro. And then just like why, and then I made sure to have a couple paragraphs, like small short ones about specifically that site. Like what about that is, how do I connect all that history I just told you to the goals and the site with a nice little closing. And so I didn't necessarily have it divided up in terms of like assessment, intervention, whatever. However, I was applying to more kind of generalist sites. If you're applying to like stuff with a very specific, very neuro-focused, or you're really interested in autism or something like that, you'll definitely want to make sure to balance it out differently and really highlight. I just want to echo what Adriana mentioned about speak their language, right? Like look at their handbook. What kind of stuff are they saying? What do they think is important? I see that you have something on your mind.
I do, and this is so small. So like in my mind, I usually say evidence-based intervention, but like a site might say empirically grounded intervention or evidence-based psychotherapy or evidence-based counseling. I would just change the way I phrase it. We're talking about the exact same thing, but those little moments of alignment, I think, really stand out. Sorry, Steph, go ahead.
That's important.
At a moment,
That's great. Yeah, and so echo their language. Like if your values align with theirs, make sure to reference that. That's what they want to know. And I think something to communicate is this connection. You want to communicate the connection between you and that site. This is part of that storytelling piece. Again, it's not about like exhaustive list of my achievements, which are great. They have that too in your CV, but it's about making why you make sense there and why they might want you and the things you have to bring to the table, which is the same advice we have for interviews basically too.
Yeah, I was going to echo something too, is that I really use their specific words that matter to me and include that into my cover letter to make sure that they know that I read through their brochure very, very well. And then not only that, I get the opportunity to talk about my story, what I have done, and then also like knowing there are areas that they are looking for and I may not have that at that moment, I will highlight that as the goals I would like to get from that side, making sure that that's the goal that you want though, right? Right. So then that will be a very authentic story that these are the things that I've done will set me apart and it would be a good fit for your site. And also what you're offering would be a good fit for my goals as well, because that's again will come up in the interview. So we'll talk about that later on. But yes, so making sure that we can have those information in there and using the same words that they used.
Yeah, you know what I just remembered? I remembered something that a faculty member that I admire a lot told me about the beginning of this process. Internships aren't looking for a perfectly formed psychologist. If you are just summarizing all of your experiences and that's it, they're going to wonder, well, what do we have to offer this student? So even though it might feel vulnerable to talk about the areas in which you're looking for development, that's so important. So do just happen to pull up one of her cover letters while we were talking about this, because we were saying our format was very similar, which was different from Steph's. We all did amazing in this process. So again, it's up to you. But our paragraphs were structured very similar. We talk about what we've done, and then but what you can help me with, or what I need to be the well-rounded psychologist I want to be, is this very specific cool thing that you have at your site that I really want. And that's gonna like that's gonna take me right over the top and make me the best psychologist I can be. So don't be afraid to state that you still have some things to learn. I know that a lot of graduate school in psychology is so evaluative, and that I think creates a little bit of lack of confidence or anxiety around revealing weaknesses or areas in which you need help. But that's the cool thing about this process, is you kind of got to a point where it's like, help me. and places are really open to that. So make sure to include that in your cover letter as well.
All right, one more thing that I think that because right now, as a time of recording these videos, we are in 2021. And so then some of the information right now is just a reflection of what's going on. During our process of applying for APPIC, it was in 2020, and the pandemic was like, still here. And then it was really affected by the pandemic, and all of our sites were interrupted a lot. And so all of our cover letters actually included that piece in there, is like how our practicum experience was impacted, how the hours were impacted by the the pandemic and whatnot. And we also talk about like how that as a kind of link to the next skill set that we actually grow, which is like telehealth. So we also including that into our cover letters. So if you have that information about how you have grown providing like services via telehealth, making sure to include that into your cover letters as well.
Mm-hmm. You might even be able to teach your, to bring expertise in telehealth to your site. I know that was one thing that I actually appreciated one of my sites saying, is like, we all learned telehealth at the same time you did. We're kind of all in this together. And so if a bunch of your training, whether it's assessment or consultation, sort of any of that stuff is through telehealth, it's an important skill, as we all now know, and definitely something to talk about.
Great. Yeah, no, that's a really good point, especially we're not sure where we're going to be at this time next year. So that's really important for people who are beginning their process right now as well. Okay, so what is something that you wish you had known as you were going through the application process?
All right, so one thing I really wish I had known is basically related to the concept of a reach site. I know a lot of us, when we applied to undergrad and graduate school, had this idea of, I'm going to have a spread of sites. I'm going to have ones that feel very competitive that I'm not sure if I'll get into. Then I called it like the natural range, where I'd be a natural fit. I basically perfectly meet the requirements. And then safety sites, where I'm like way overqualified. So this is a shoe-in. I definitely got this. I'm going to get this no-brainer. So I tried to do the same thing with the APPIC process. So I asked students that had already gone through our process and graduated. I asked a couple of faculty at different universities, how do you conceptualize the idea of a reach or a safety for something like APPIC? This strategy can work for some folks, but for myself and a dear friend of mine who's already attained her PhD, it didn't really work. Let me tell you why. So the criteria that we used is like, do you meet their minimum hours requirement for like intervention and assessment, or are you over or are you under? The second was, have they taken school psych students in the last 3 years? And then the third one was based on interview selectivity. So like they tell you on the APPIC website how many people apply, how many people they interview, and how many people they accept, and then they break it down into school clinical and counseling. So I thought, okay, great. Like, I'm going to set some of these to green. It's all going to be great. What I should have known this wasn't going to work, because I was over hours for all 15 sites I applied for. I should have known right there that this was going to be meaningless. I got interviews at almost all of my reaches, no interviews in my natural range, and one interview from my safeties, which were all phenomenal schools, by the way. They were safe, and I still wanted to go there. So this was obviously very confusing for me. And the issue is, you don't really know how the world sees you. Like, the application is so much more holistic than 3 numbers. Like and that's what happened with me. And it's not funny, it was deeply anxiety provoking, but I called this dear friend of mine who went through the exact same thing when she applied, which was interviews at all her reaches, no safety interviews, and a handful of the like natural range. And it was just like, we didn't even realize how overqualified we were because so many aspects of our application that were standout weren't included in that safety reach process. So you can, if you know people for whom this has worked, definitely do it. But if you've got some really unique things about your application, you might want to consider that it's going to be viewed more holistically, and that, you know, that's not really a really helpful tool for you. And I mention this because as I started getting rejections from sites that I thought were a shoo-in, I was like, I'm not going to get any interviews. I'm not going to go on internship. This isn't going to work out for me. And then like the ones I was actually the most excited about started pouring in, and I was like, okay, this is what's happening. This is fine, I guess. So basically, I wish I had known that breaking it down to numbers isn't that helpful.
I think this is an extremely individual, qualitative process, and the approaches we try to conceptualize, like what's a reach, what's safety, that seems quantitative. And that's just, that doesn't work. It's not the same computation at all from their end.
Yeah.
When you write these essays, like I just said earlier, you need to brag about yourself. You need to sell yourself. And sometimes doing that feels weird. I think especially I come from a bicultural background. A lot of values from my Filipino side are in me, and just not having this same kind of like, the same doesn't feel the same for me to brag about myself, right, than some of my colleagues that come from a very different cultural background. So for me, I actually felt way more imposter-y during like the writing and the production of all these things, saying what I have done over the last 4.5 years or whatever. I felt more imposter-y at that point than I ever had in grad school. And what I wish I had known at the start was just like, people are on your side. I mean, maybe I just got lucky because I applied to sites with just stellar supervisors, and they're like very humanizing. And I almost think of like, not to say that grad school's dehumanizing, but I will say some aspects of it can feel really hard and really bad. And so to know that I was just like meeting with all these people who are seeing my humanity and really celebrating the strengths that I had was a really important experience. But I feel like I went through a lot of negativity on the front end because I felt like I was performing. I felt like, you know, selling myself and being honest about my experiences felt a little performative in some way. And I don't think it necessarily is. It's just part of the process, and it's a process that can be uncomfortable. And so just knowing that, like, at least the things I value, I looked for sites where I knew supervisors were going to care for me as a person. And when I actually met them, that was right. And so it was really cool because that was important to me. And I know that's not everyone's experience. I know clinical sites and stuff are probably very different than like, you know, community mental health and like, you know, integrated outpatient or whatever. But yeah, you might have to live with those feelings of imposter, but it doesn't need to be a syndrome. It's not pervasive. It's not persistent. Those are just experiences, and we get past them.
I'm going to say something, Brianna, that you can either include or not. It's just a reference to a great tweet that I found very empowering, but is also a joke. Okay, basically, I really resonated with what Stephanie said about the imposter syndrome piece. I really do feel like I was just in a state of like mild to moderate continuous panic from the start of the fall semester until 5 minutes after the match results were announced, just the entire time. And what she's describing is like these feelings of being an imposter were so strong in me. And I saw a tweet in like October that was like, so what? You're an imposter. Accept it. You've tricked them all. You're a trickster goddess who sits upon your throne of lies. And I was like, yes, give me my crown. And it's just like lean into the feelings because we all have them. Like, so maybe not all. There's like 1 or 2% of people that don't experience that. And like, give me your tricks. But like, it's so normal. It's so part of it. And just lean into knowing, like Steph said, it's fleeting, it's momentary, and you'll get through it and you'll be okay.
Yeah, I was similarly. I think that the entire process starting in summer is just like, gosh, like I have to brag about myself. What is there to brag about?
Oh my God.
It's like nothing, you know, and you're like, God, what if I over brag myself? Really not authentic. like a D-bag, And so it's just so important to make sure I have the right amount. But still, the imposter syndrome is just like creeping up all the time. I'm telling you, no, that's too much, and there's nothing there to brag about, man. So it was really hard. But I want to say that one thing is I have to like ask really great people, in my support network, my great friends, Steph and Adriana, that just kind of like let me know that this is who you are. You got this. You gotta talk about it. How great you are and whatnot, and have great people who like just really support you and rooting for you. To have that people around when as you're going through this process. And then I was going to talk about the next thing, which is like, what are the values that really are valuable to you? Have that sort of like mentioned throughout the application package, right? It's all about like, what do you really value about improving, the assessment process, making more culturally sensitive, culturally responsive? What does cultural humility means to you? Why is that important to you? How is your story, not just within grad school, but your entire life story? How does that have helped you making those choices in your practical experience? And then what are those stories that you have experienced that unique to who you are, guide you on this like process of applying to these different sites, and why are these goals match those life stories that you mentioned? Because all of that show a unified like the story. I think we mentioned the word story a lot throughout, but I think that is exactly what it is, that the good side want to see your authentic self and your authentic stories. They want to see that, want to hear that, and they want to value everything about you. And that should be the side that we want to aim for. Being who you are and the side of celebrating who you are in your amazing stories, right? And if your things about cultural humility, think about social justice, DEI, and all of that amazing, just have that in there. Of course, like Steph mentioned earlier, write in a way, but still have that sense of authenticity within your package, because that's where we want to be, where your authentic self is celebrated. And then I also want to comment on imposter syndrome thing. Yes, so many of that all the time, 24/7. Just it's like, you don't have anything to brag about, do you? But it's so fun because I think I watched a videos, and then this one, I forgot who she is, but she was saying like imposter syndrome is a way to tell us to be humble. Right? You don't want to get that in a way that, like how we talk about DSM-5 when it gets too much and impairing whatnot, but having that imposter syndrome voices keep us humble, keeping us wanting to improve, keeping us reaching for higher. And otherwise, it's just a little narcissistic, right? Yikes.
On one hand, but the other hand is that people are really successful looking at y'all, and then you don't feel successful because minoritized folks are more likely, especially women, to feel those feelings of imposter. And it's not right. It's unjust, and it makes this process more stressful and more difficult. So and you can keep or leave any of this, but one experience that I will always remember that actually helped me amidst that kind of like self-esteem crisis I was having in the fall was we had a group of the 5 of us who are really tight during the pandemic. We called ourselves a cohort. We had a CV workshop afternoon, and we all kind of looked at each other's CVs, like sharing screen, and made comments and like pumped people up. And like, I was not feeling good that day at all. I was like, I don't even feel, I'm very sherry typically, but I was like, I don't even feel like showing this. Like, I feel like a piece of trash. But just having like these ladies and a couple other friends, like, say that I have done things and really affirm my experiences was a really important turning point, I think, for me in the whole process. Like it really is also during this pandemic, right? It's easy to get down anyway, but being able to have community who are like, yes, your CV is beautiful, and make comments about how to make it better.
It's great. Excellent font choices, as always, with our dear Stephanie Campbell.
Everything's about Stephanie, just beautiful.
It really is. I think you should leave all of this in, Brianna. She is the queen of our heart.
Yes, beautiful, and yes.
Right. So we wanted to mention, like, we've mentioned a lot about getting people to read your materials, having people to talk through and process with, people to pump you up when you're not feeling so great about this mess of an application process sometimes. But there are so many people who help you along the way. And some of the really important formal ones are your recommenders. And so you've certainly asked for recommendations before. My piece of advice here is especially if you're like from a school background and you have like a lot of potential avenues of what you want to do, I ended up having several recommenders. So my DCT wrote one for all my sites. I have 2 advisors, so they wrote some for some of my sites. And then I picked some different third people depending on the site and what they were looking for. So I had a school supervisor write ones for school-based sites, and I had my community mental health person write them for that. Whoever is going to represent you well, you can tweak that a little. It doesn't have to be, I felt, also bad asking me like, hey, can y'all write like 9 recommendation letters for me? But often people are used to getting this question. They might have a process for you, like a worksheet to fill out on like what you think is important about the site, which is really helpful. So asking them early and making sure it's like a good fit and that they feel comfortable. Definitely recommend being thoughtful about your recommenders and asking them.
The only like yes to everything Steph just said, I just wanted to say your recommenders aren't actually submitting 9 letters. They're submitting the same standard form to every site once. So you just like upload,
right.
Send it to each site that you requested. So it isn't, so before you panic about asking a recommender to send 15 letters, it's really just the one, and then they submit what they've seen of your work over their time working with you to all the sites.
Yes, that's a great point. You can ask people to individualize certain ones, but not everyone's going to be willing to do that. So depending on like your relationship and how much they want to put in, most of my people just put in like the same letter, but our DCT was like, you can pick like 3 sites where I'm going to customize it. And so she did for like our top choices or something. So everyone's going to be different, but just know that it's not a traditional letter. It is just a form basically where they answer some questions. They are kind of extensive, but they're not having to come up with it from scratch.
Yeah, I was gonna add the same thing too. But yeah, I do know like there are other my friends who ask their recommenders for different like type of site. But for me, very similar, that I did not meet for that as either. So then I just asked my 3 SAM recommendation letter writing person, which is my advisor, all of my clinical supervisors that I really like, because like most of the sites that I'm applying for was like very much focusing on a lot of clinical work, like interventions and things like that. And I sort of like sent them I think it's called the standard reference. Hold on, let me see. Standard reference form. And you can, SRF, and you can find that on the APPIC website, or you can find that on the timeline page from Dr. Grace Chen. Shout out to her. She really keeps our lives together. It's a very difficult process. And yeah, so then like for me, it was like, I guess I made it easier for my recommendation writers to do that. So then I just want to share a little bit more about the process with the AAPI online system is that when there's I believe there's a button during our time, could be different during your time when you apply. Mm-hmm. So then during my time, I do know there's a button you can choose. A lot of this is set within the AAPI website too. You can look it up just to make sure. And then you can click that button and it will say that apply this letter to all your site. Click that, and then as soon as your recommendation writer send in their SRF, filled out SRF form, right? And then if you were to add one more site to your system, they automatically add that letters into that site, right? So then like, so it's just easier for everybody. Like you add that site, click submit or whatever, I forgot, but I did the upload button.
It just pulls it in.
It just put that letters right into that site for you immediately. So there's very convenient supposedly for the whole process. So hopefully that's the same thing that by the time you apply, we would stand for that. But I was going to add a little bit more information about the recommendation part is that, yeah, so use our SRF form. I know some people actually like sort of like provide some bullet points to like ask the recommendation writer people to like what to hit on and things like that. And yes, so Adrian did that, right? So then for me, I didn't do that specifically, but I did talk about like certain activities that I want them to like highlight the time that we're together. So different supervisors or different letter writers will have different experience, and I want them to talk about different experience. So I sent them a forms about what to hit on. And also I also add the information about like my unique skills that they may not remember right away. Like I am multilingual, multicultural, and things like that. And then what are some values that I really value about, which is like multiculturalism, cultural humility, social justice, and what is it specific about. And then I also kind of ask them, I also add information about like, what are my goals? Like my goals for internship, my goals for postdoc, like 2 or 3 years, things like that. And my long-term goals in the future and whatnot. And I want to ask them to talk about those goals as well and see why I'm a good fit for most of the sites I'm applying for, which means that before we send those like letters, invitation out to our recommendation people, we might want to do a little bit of research on the main site that we want to apply for. So then what they are writing could be a good match. Well, it's not a 100% match, but a pretty good match to what you would be writing for your essay-ish and your cover letter, especially. And then like a good match for their site values and mission, things like that. Because we want everything to kind of match up as much as we possibly can before we send it out. So that's what I did. So kind of maybe ask so that you can make, what I did was I sent an email out to the people that I want to ask as the letters writer for me around like maybe September or so, to let them know like, hey, I would love for you to help me out. If you want to meet with them, that's even better. Just to give them some like spiels about what you're looking for, and then send them the forms about what you want them to kind of like hit on in their letters. It's a standard form. It's like not too much creativity there, but what do you want them to hit on when they like work on that forms for you? And yeah, I think that's what I did, and I sent them the standard form too. So then they have that form, and then they can submit that by the time, due date. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much useful information about the application process and the timeline. You all referenced some really great resources that will be linked in the description below. So thank you so much for your time. And then we have one more video coming next week. So stay tuned for that. See ya.